Hello, my name is Kim Beaton. I'm a sculptor of 20 years experience, and I've been doing large public sculptures all around the United States and here in New Zealand. Today I'm going to be introducing you to a new kind of clay called Pal Tiya. This is a clay that you can sculpt freely and then place it outdoors. I hope you enjoy what we're about to show you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, today we're going to make a small elven face. This elven face is an ivy face, which means it's supposed to peek out from ivy and look at you. It gives the impression the sculpture is a lot larger than it is when you're just doing a face. So it's going to be a lady elf this time. And to start, you have gloves and tinfoil and hot glue. To start off with, rip off a lot of pieces of tinfoil. We're going to crumple it so there's a lot of air in there. We want as much air as we can in these sculptures. And then, see it flattened? Only put hot glue where it's flat, because you don't want to waste a lot of glue. Then, tap. Now I'm going to fill out a shape that is essentially an egg shape. That'll include the person's jaw, across the bottom of the jaw, most of their skull, coming out like this and facing me. As you can see, we've created an egg shape. Now, this face is going to be built up a little bit more here before we put any Pal Tiya on it. What we're trying to do is create essentially the skull, the back of the skull, the cranium, and the jawline. If I pinch this in right here, you can immediately see how that's the jaw, the chin, forehead, and skull. Pinch that in on both sides, and it truly looks like there's a skull sitting there on the tabletop. Now, a lot of people ask, what's the most important feature of the human face? Is it the eyes? Is it the nose? Well, none of them are. The single most important thing that you sculpt is the skull that's underlying the face. That's why you can tell what somebody looks like if, say, I turn away from you like this. What you see are the bones and the ridges of someone's skull, not their eyes, their nose. I've actually done portraits of people, and I've left off their nose, left out their eyes, left out their lips, and you could still tell who it was. So at this point, the face has to pop up a little bit more. And I'm going to start sculpting in the bony identifiers for that face. I've got tinfoil. Flip it into a couple of smaller pieces. Biggest identifier, the bony ridge of the eye, the orbit, the eye socket. To put that on, I'm actually going to build up before I put down. And the eyes are pretty much in the center of the face. They're not high, unless you're doing an elven face, in which case the anatomy can be where you wish it. So I make a little C shape, and glue that on. Put the other side of the eye socket on. Make sure it's leveled up. Now this gal has a very, very wide eyes, and she's going to come down to a narrow, delicate chin. So I'm going to pinch these areas in here. And this is why you left this tinfoil really fluffy, because you need the ability to compress it. Now as you compress it, this stuff gets hard, to the point at the end of this is going to be so hard I could stand on it without any further compression. And you want the ability to be able to continue to move that. So, right now I'm looking to shape just the skull. Now, I've brought in the cheeks a little. Now I'm going to punch the eye sockets in a little bit. Okay, another thing I'm going to do while I'm here is the dental arch. Essentially, it's the region right here, and it's where your teeth are. And that dental arch, honest to God, has the exact shape of a tennis ball. Let me rip off a little bit. And I need that rounded. I need it to bulge slightly forward like that. Because if that's not in the bones, it will never be in the face. The widest part of anybody's face, of any race, of any human on the planet, the widest part is directly behind the eyes. It's that sweeping bone called the zygomatic arch. And that's always, all faces triangulate to that point. So when I'm looking at this, I'm following the bottom of the eye socket out, so it's almost in line with the eyes. That's going to be the widest part of our face. And I'm going to make a little tiny bit of a zygomatic arch right there to make sure that space stays wide. Essentially, it's the tall, high outside of your cheeks. Now I'm going to put on a little bit of a chin. Now this is a bit of a cheat because the chin is not in the bones. It isn't. The chin is actually a pad that sits on top of your bones and floats around, which is when I do this, that chin moves with me. But for this woman, she's essentially symmetrical. And so she's not going to have huge facial expressions like this on her. We're going to keep her very subtle and very pretty. So I want that chin to anchor the face. Now, when you're getting close to the end, Pal Tiya, you load it up at least to 5 mil. So you have to make sure that this last, before you're finished, is compressed down. And you use one of these, which is really lovely because you can truly sculpt something delicately. When you're finishing off the tinfoil, and we're virtually there, you want to make sure there's none of this loose tinfoil anywhere. So you go around any place that it's loose, just push hot glue into there and make sure that surface is tight and hard. So all the things are there present on the face that need to be in a skull, which is your forehead, your temple bones here on the outside. You've got your zygomatic arch here, wide cheekbones, points here, dental arch, chin, jawline, and the skull. One last thing I'm going to do with the skull, and that is to push the corners of the eye backwards. The corners of our eyes do go back. That's how we're able to look off the side. So those, on just that location, go back. Now we're going to start to put Pal Tiya onto the sculpture. You need a couple of things. For a sculpture of this size, it's good to have one of these, which is a really lovely old Kenwood chef. This is a bread dough mixer, often called a kitchen mixer. It's wonderful. This particular mixer is 30 years old, and I have now put 1,500 pounds of clay through this mixer, doing large sculptures up to a quarter of a ton. So these things are hell for stout. They're absolutely wonderful machines, and they enable us to make large batches of clay. You need Pal Tiya, some scoops. You need pretty much 2 tools. These are different sizes of the same thing, a nice little hand trowel. This is often used for oil painting, palette. This is a concrete trowel, so virtually the same tool, same purpose. Water, if necessary, a little pipette for dropping drips of water on, and spray bottle. Pretty much, and gloves. Do keep gloves on. Pal Tiya can dry your hands pretty fiercely, so always work with gloves. Now I'm going to mix up a batch and show you how that's done. I'm going to make a batch of about 4 cups. So, get this out of the way. I love this machine. You fill this, move the pipette out of the way. most of the time. So it's 4 to 1. 4 cups of Pal Tiya, 1 cup of water. But when we do this, we're going to put almost all of the water in there, but not all of it, just a little bit. Leave some out. Next, Pal Tiya can kick up some dust. So we take a towel, a large towel, and we drape it over the whole thing. We turn it on to a fairly slow speed. We let that run for about 30 seconds. After 30 seconds, it doesn't kick up any more dust. Now we're going to watch this for a bit. It needs to mix for about 4 minutes. 5 minutes it makes it a little stronger. And what we want is for it to become a nice, beautiful, uniform mass that's going back and forth between the paddle and the bowl, and the paddle and the bowl. If it sticks on the bowl, it's too soft. If it clumps onto the paddle, it's too hard. And so you get to determine exactly the consistency you want. Now I'm going to make mine a little on the soft side because I want to cover a large area fast. If I'm doing super detail, I'll make it a little harder. Okay, I'm going to turn it off, check, see what it looks like. Yes, that's a really, this one is very, very soft. You can see that it's very fibrous, so especially when I pull it apart, you can see there are millions of little fibers in there. You can see it's beautiful clay. It's lovely, it's silky, it's very soft. So I'm going to put it on there. I've sort of flipped it out so it's about 5 mil thick. Press it into the tin foil. The great thing about tin foil is that corrugated surface really gives a great grip, which means you can build things upside down if you have to. So you put it on, you can see how quickly just pressing it into the tin foil that you can coat that 5 mil thick. So it looks like 4 cups of Pal Tiya covers almost an entire human head. Now we're going to make another batch of almost exactly that same size, but I'm going to make it a little stiffer because I'm going to start adding detail. Okay, this is now a slightly stiffer form of clay. You can see it's a little less wet and it's a lot more robust. It is incredibly strong. But it's now stiff enough. The first one was softer so I could move quickly. Now we're going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to make sure, since I've already established I'm 5 mil thick. Okay, that's as strong as it needs to be. At 5 mil thick you can stand on this sculpture. But I want to bring the features up, so I'm going to find them. There's a bone here. This is the bone that comes up, the bottom of the cheekbone. You can see how it immediately makes it look a lot more skull-like when you put that shaping onto it. Re-identify my Zygomatic Arch, just in case I have to thicken that area. So you can see, you know where you're going. Keep the eye sockets back and full. Eyes. One of the biggest mistakes that every young artist makes is they, honest to God, try and put eyes outside of the eye sockets. The eye socket is here. You can see when I sketch it in. Whenever you're about to put an eyeball in, your eye doesn't sit smack center in the middle of an eye socket. It doesn't. It sits up in the upper corner of the eye socket, and it tucks in behind that protective bone. And so you want it up that direction, not in the center, because that's not how it works. What's happening, and I'll use a pencil, is if you tap a pencil this way, it will just touch the eye in the center. But if you go this way, it actually rocks on top of the eye. That means you have peripheral vision, but that bony arch protects your eye by the eye being deep inside of it. So I'm going to quickly patch in some eyes. Here, again, tuck it behind that bone. particularly good rule about eyes is your eyes are, or your face is 5 eyes apart. If that's your eye, I'll use this. See, that's your eye. On a real human being, there's an eye width on the outside of this. This gal's an elf, her eyes are bigger. Then there's an eye width there, eye width, and eye width. Human eyes are really tiny. They're shockingly small. Human eyes are about that big. As you can see, they're very, very small. So for this fairy gal, we're going to make them larger. I've made the eyes wider so that the face itself, which is the eyes, lips, mouth, nose, this triangular area, is 10% larger for the shape of the skull, and that will make it much more fantastical. It's a lovely trick. They used to do that back in the 1700s with portraiture to make someone's face more alive. We need a center line. There. Whoops, nope, that's not quite right. And a center line about right there. Now, if any part of your sculpture is, like the chin, is not quite centered, this is where you discover it. Just draw that line on there and pop it out so we have. You notice I haven't done the nose. It's more important that I make sure the features are symmetrical. Symmetry is the higher standard of beauty in all peoples on earth. If a face is asymmetrical, it is less beautiful. And the more closer you become to pure symmetry, the more beautiful it will be. Okay, line through the eyes, like that. Make sure that they're not this way, and very specifically, they're not wrong that way. Okay. On humans, the rule is once you've drawn the eyes in, 1/3 is the nose, 1/3 is the lips. But we're making an elf gal. So what we're going to do is her nose is here and her lips are there. Now I already established that in the bones which are underlying the surface. Okay. I need a little bit of water. You have to work quickly, but it's good to keep a teeny bit of water going. Eyelids. Shape the eye as much as you can. Keep it a roundish surface. You don't have to be too doctrinaire. We'll be fussing that area later. So, roll out. See? It goes taper. Oops, there. Goes taper, wide, taper. Right? I'm going to smooth it like that. And I'm going to smooth it like that. So, what you've got here is this ledge is taper, wide, taper, and so is that. But this is really wide, and that's very narrow. Eyes. Draw a triangle. High, long to low. See how it touches the corner right where that goes into the bone? And this one is long, short. This is a parallelogram. So when I take the eyelid, I literally take and I place it there, and I tuck that eyelid under the bone because it moves up inside the bone just like a shutter. Okay? 2/3, 1/3. And now we flip that upside down and we place that there. And that gives us eyelids that are the correct thickness. You really want to see that edge, and it must tuck behind the bone. Now tear ducts, I'm going to nip off a little piece like this, put it there. Tear ducts don't follow the eye exactly. They actually launch off the eye and they touch the side of the nose. The eye stops about right there. And then you have a large area of tear ducts there, and then it reaches up onto the edge of the nose. Now that puts the structure there. We can fuss with making it look pretty later, but it's present and accounted for. I'm going to do it to the other side real quick. Keep that line crisp so you make sure that the eyes are still lined up. The inside edge and the outside edge do line up, but that's high there and that edge is typically low. So just a teeny bit, pinch some off. Because your hands are awfully big for this kind of stuff. It's good to just pinch off clay and push it in there and smooth it out. Okay, we'll come back to the eyes in a little bit later. Now you see I'm occasionally spraying this down with a minute amount of water. It only takes a few micro drops for this to come back again, because as you can see my gloves are dragging the water out of it, and that will tend to make it a little too hard. Also, men's hands are really warm. Literally, a man doing this for a couple of minutes will cause this stuff to cure an hour earlier. So for men, keep what you're working on off to the side, don't touch it as much. So if you're doing a nose, put it on quickly and then just manipulate it with the tool. We're going to do the nose right now. Okay, we're going to anchor that down to that 5 mil substrate. Start shaping it a little bit. Oh, I like that. The nose is made up of several masses. There's the 2 upper nasal masses, which are here and there. They're present on anyone, no matter how thin your nose is. And then you have the 2 lower nasal masses that are on either side of this. And it's subtle on most people, but it is there. And if you put them on as 2 masses, you'll always even subtly retain their presence. When putting on the nostrils, put a mask there, solid, and put a mask there. Now anchor that mask down, because you're going to be moving it a lot. Anchor that mask down. Again, going to be a lot of movement when you lift that off the surface with the nostrils. Now we're not going to lift those nostrils up just yet, because once we start lifting them, it makes the nose a little too fragile. You can see it's shifting around a lot. Now that's going to, in about 10 minutes, that's going to be pretty firm, and it's not going to want to move around a whole lot. Lips. As you can see, we already have the lips going around the dental arch. And a lot of first students make the problem, they think that lips are straight. They're not. They curve from the side, they come over the top, and they go down again here. This region is called the node. You always put a blob of clay on the outside of that, because there are 5 muscles that grab onto that. And that group of 5 muscles on each side gives our mouths the incredible dexterity for forming human speech. Now, we're going to make another tapered mass. See how I've got that size? So it's taper, wide, taper. We put that on there. Now the lips disappear under that node. They actually tuck in behind the same way the eyelids tuck in behind the bone. They do not sit on top of that node. They hollow into it. Lips are an unusual structure in and of themselves. And people have often wondered, why are lips red? Well, I'll show you in a single demonstration. If you take human skin, and my human skin, and I'm a thin gal, is about ½ an inch thick. So if you have a piece of skin and you fold it out like that, you end up with the 2 masses of skin, like so. And the reason your lips are red is because it's the inside of your mouth that's on the outside of your body. Lower lip is done slightly differently. This is rounder, as you can see. Again, 2/3, 1/3. That rule never changes, by the way. It's 2/3, 1/3. Tapers to the ends. Now this goes here. But more importantly, it sits at an angle. It goes that way. This also tucks inside behind that node, but it's two muscles, and they're sitting on top of these very broad columns that end about right there. That is not one muscle, it is two. So I've shaped it. Again, those two columns are like chair legs. They're going to one side. And then you have the chin that's floating between them, like that. Now we're going to stretch a little bit of skin over that joint, like so. There's the smile line, which is here, like that. I like my figures to smile. But you'll notice it comes around the node, forward, and then sweeps around the back of the nostril. It doesn't touch the nostril edge. It can't. This is a flap of skin in that area. So we're going to put that on. Pick it up, and again, it rolls around the node and then curves. So it's a gull wing shape. And then I go pinch off like that. And see, this now blurs effortlessly in behind it and gives you correct structure. This figure looks masculine because the features are so aggressive right now. We'll soften it back into being a female just shortly. To do that, we're going to fill in the bottom of the cheekbones. This is a kidney. It is a soft rubber kidney-like shape. But what this kidney does, and it's fabulous, is you immediately drag it onto the surface and it blurs all the bones and the detail together. You can see this slides across the surface like an ice skater. It's incredibly fast. Okay, I'm going to settle that line because we don't need it that harsh. Settle, settle, settle. Okay, her lips. I'm going to shrink her lips down a little. In fact, I'm going to pull that node a little forward. Okay, it's not going to pull, so we're just going to add another node. And I'd like her face to be, and her mouth to be slightly more delicate. So you can see, in the middle of sculpting, you can change what you want to do. Pal Tiya gives you about 15 minutes of really soft time, and then gives you about 2 hours of fussing with all of the details. I'm adding some eyebrows. I think we'll just, let's make her eyes a little bit more animalistic. I'm going to take that brow out a little further. In the brow, I'm going to kind of like that. Now, these nodes, I'm going to push them back just a teeny bit. You can see how that really makes it look like the lips are folding out from under there. They fold out. Upper lid the same way. Comes up from behind that node. And that gives great clarity to the face. One thing about sculpting, you can check symmetry all you want by putting center lines on. But one thing your hands know is if you're floating together like this, your hands can feel symmetry better than you can see it. I'm now going to lift the jaw a little bit so you can clearly see back of the jaw, top of the jaw. Now we're going to use a brush. I've made it slightly wet. You don't want it sloppy. Just get enough moisture on there that it moves. And now we're going to soften these forms even more. I think we're probably hitting on about 15 minutes. We have 2 hours to bring this to a completion. Okay, this tool, I'm going to shift to one last tool. And that's this one. So a trowel and this one will probably give you almost everything you need. This tool is amazing because it has so many what's called an outside radius. Sorry, this is an outside radius. This is an inside radius. What this tool does is, because that's so scooped, we can reach inside that eye and suddenly, quickly shape that radius. We want that eye up underneath that lid, and we want this lid up under that bone. Now, if you're doing some illusionary effects, and if you're sculpting, you're certainly doing some, you're not sculpting exactly what's there. Women have eyelashes. What I'm going to do is give the impression she has eyelashes simply by increasing the size of this dark shadow here. If it's thin at the start, here, and that begins to thicken, and it begins to thicken much more than, say, how thick the skin should be, it will look like she's wearing eye makeup. Now, we can make her look very sultry by making the eyelids high here, like that, just by increasing where you notice where the eyelid goes under that bone. That's nice and sultry. I think that's pretty. When you're sculpting, one of the most powerful things to remember is you are sculpting light. What I'm making here is highlights and shadows. So, since this highlight here is right next to the blade of that darkness, if you want a balanced figure, you'll notice that, see how you have deep darks, these are almost black, and bright highlights. And down here on the lips, you also have deep darks and bright shiny highlights, because you've changed the angle. You're casting a shadow. But this doesn't look balanced because you have these darks and lights, and nowhere else on the piece. At this point, we're going to add the darks that happen around the nostrils. If you don't have that sharp juxtaposition between dark and light 3 times on a face or a sculpture in general, it will look flat. Now, we're going to add a little bit of hair to her because she's going to be wearing a cowl, but you'll just see the leading edge of the hair. If you want hair to be believable, you have to show the roots at least one location. Okay, hair follows rules. Essentially, it goes across the front. You can have a widow's peak, but that hairline goes to about here. And then it curves around the temple bone in an arch, then that curves around the cheek. So there's always that bump. I'm going to put hair on here, like that. The rest of her hair will go under the cowl, but I want to show roots here, and her hair has to flip up like that. Now, not a lot of her hair is going to be seen underneath the cowl we're going to be putting on her, which is fine. So mostly I'm going to shape hair as a series of ribbons. It's flat on the top, it has a side, and it has an edge. Flat, edge, and then this one will drop a little bit lower, and it might sit under that next one. But it's never just a series of scratches. It's always a series of planes that lap over the top of each other like that. Hello, we're going to make some ears for this little lady really quickly. You can see I've placed it on burlap, and that allows me to pick it up and down again. If it's on here, it tends to stick. So you can shape ears either on the sculpture itself, or if they're off the sculpture, you can make them symmetrical. So I'm going to quickly shape in some, ooh, that is getting stiff. You can see how it's starting to crack a little. Yeah, this clay is getting to the point that it doesn't want to be moved around too much. And lock it on. Now, a very good rule when it comes to composition is if you can duplicate a line, your sculpture is stronger. So you can see we have this long sweeping line. It's identical to that line. I've made this batch. This batch is stiff because I'm going to be making a cowling for her, a hat. And I want that cowling to stand rigid as I place it against this table. Now, symmetry is something a person is always fighting with. Bilateral symmetry is one of the fussiest things that you have to do. And a trick that you should always be aware of is flip your sculpture around and look at it upside down. Now we've glued it on here so I can flip it. And looking straight here, I can say, oh my God, that nostril doesn't match. Now I can still shift the sculpture because that tinfoil, as hard as it is, look, I can move it still. So, when you're making a cowl, get yourself a piece of burlap. Ooh, like that. I want the thickness of the fabric to be pretty heavy on the back because I'd like it to be rigid. I'm making this, it's about 5 mil thick. See? Fabric. And more importantly, it cuts like fabric. So I want a crisp edge following the grain across the front edge of that sculpture. Now you can have some wind, you can do that, but I think we'll do without the wind on this one. So I get to fuss all I want. As you can see, I'm just draping right over the top of the other fabric. If I want it to glue, I just weld it together like that, and then just push some fabric into it so it disappears. I don't want it too crushed. I like the idea of that standing a little bit more. Now that the hair is firm, we can scratch in some additional textural highlights and eyes. We're going to take this tool and we're going to gently start to shift that out. Now those eyes are pretty firm, and that's what I want. I need them to be just firm enough so that as I move it, the eyeball itself isn't distorting. I need that shadow to take place. I'm also lifting the eyelid a little bit because every eye has a corneal bulge, and that corneal bulge will lift the eyelid. It's why you can see where somebody's looking when their eyes are closed. Then, see where it's dark in there? I'm going to take this tool and I am going to drill a little hollow like that. I'm going to make a highlight post. A highlight post is a convention used by sculptors to show that something is shiny. So I have made a little snake here. See? I'm going to clip the tip of it. Click. And flatten it. Now I have something that catches highlight. Then I'm going to take this highlight post and I'm going to slide it down inside there. So I now have a bright highlight buried in the center of a dark area, and that will make the eyes look wet. Everything is present. We've got the eyes well situated in their sockets, eyebrows, uniform nose. She's bilaterally symmetrical. We've got the dental arch that the lips wrap up and around on. These muscles go to either side. A distinct node, subtle little muscles there, ears, and a very, very textured hood. We are at this point done. This requires some preparation for storage. At the end of the day, when I'm completely done, I'm going to add a little bit of water to this, and then you need to wrap it in plastic because that water has to stay on that surface to allow it to cure properly. The following day, you need to get wet towels, soak them in water, drape it over the sculpture, and then wrap it again. When it has those wet towels, you wrap it again, and 5 days from then, it will be extremely hard cure. I guess a good rule is the first day you wrap it, it will come up to a certain hardness. The second day, when you open it up, this will be the consistency of like a hard cheese. So you can carve and you can continue to add pieces on, add eyebrows, anything you want. Add ears if you want, or antennae, or even more fabric. Wrap it again, keep it wet. The next day, it's like a soft wood. And the next day, it's like a hardwood. On the fifth day, it's very hard. It's almost stone hard. But you can continue to add to this as much as you want. If you want to add more after it's gone firm, make sure that your surface gets heavily raked, like you put large, sharp textural elements on it. And that means the next day, when you want to add on to that, it'll stick because it's a grippy surface. And that's how you prepare a sculpture for maintenance, because you want this to be able to last outside for decades and decades and decades. And you can continue to tweak this again for another 2 hours. This, I think, has come out to be about a 2-hour process in total, so it's not that hard. This is a lot of fun. This is the stuff that I really enjoy, and this will be loved by someone in their garden. So I do say, give it a go. Try it. This is fun. This is the sculpture that we've been working on throughout this entire demonstration, but as you can see, it has radically changed. I had completely finished the sculpture and gotten it painted, but originally it had these 2 tabs that came off the hood, and after I finished I realized I really didn't like them. So what I've done is I've gone back to the sculpture and I've completely changed it. I chiseled off those 2 tabs off the hood, I propped the sculpture up and completely resculpted a neck and shoulders. I then used the draping method to create an entirely new hood for this gal, so she's now 40% different. And I've been able to blend beautifully and add more to her jaw and strengthen her chin a little bit. So even after your sculpture is finished, you can go back and make dramatic changes. There's a rule in sculpture. Never let your sculpture bully you into deciding something that you don't feel is right. You're very much in charge, and now this sculpture is considerably better. So remember that. You can make any change you want at any time.